Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal Podcast. So it is March, and we are celebrating music therapists. Today on the show, I have Dr. Brian Abrams. Brian Abrams is an analytical music therapist and fellow of the Association for Music and Imagery, has been a music therapist since 1995, with experience across a wide range of clinical contexts. Prior to his current position at Montclair State University as an associate professor of music and coordinator of music therapy, he served on the faculty at Immaculata University and Utah State University. He has published and presented internationally on a wide range of topics, such as music therapy and cancer care, music psychotherapy, music therapy and transgenerational trauma, humanistic music therapy, and the interdisciplinary area of health humanities, including his role as one of 5 authors of a 2015 book by that title. He has also contributed to the establishment of several medical music therapy programs. He has served on the editorial boards of numerous journals, such as Music Therapy Perspectives, the Nordic Journal of Music Therapy and Voices, a World Forum for Music Therapy. From 2005 to 2011, he served on the board of the Mid-Atlantic region of the American Music Therapy Association, including as president from 2007 to 2009. From 2005 through the present, he has served on the AMTA Assembly of Delegates, including as assembly representative on the AMTA Board of Directors from 2010 to 2013, and as an assembly speaker from 2012 to 2013. He currently serves on the AMTA Board of Directors as an assembly representative alternate. Welcome to one of my mentors and former professors, Dr. Brian Abrams.
Hi there, Tammy. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you. So for the listeners who are not familiar with music therapy, that is a profession that both Dr. Abrams and I are in. And music therapy is an allied health profession in which degreed and board certified professionals use music to achieve non-musical goals. And it's a really great profession, and we can be found working at universities and nursing homes and hospitals and schools and all over the place. Dr. Abrams, would you like to start by telling us about any current projects or research that you're working on?
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned when you read my bio, you mentioned a couple of things that are areas of interest for me, such as humanistic music therapy. That's something I've been working with for some time, developing theory, theoretical constructs, and really exploring different ways of looking at music therapy and understanding it through a humanistic and humanities-centered lens. So maybe not even traditionally what we think of with humanistic psychology, the work of Rogers, Maslow, those kinds of things, and the individualistic views of humanism. I'm really looking at things more in terms of understanding what we do as serving humanity and how we do that in our individual clinical work and in our everyday lives as therapists and through the arts, through music, and how that manifests. So I'm looking at all different ways of understanding that from various perspectives. And in addition, lately I've really been delving into the area of transgenerational trauma and music therapy. This is partly through my own experience as a client and as a therapist, and observing the ways in which people work with trauma from a place of having inherited a lot of that trauma from generations prior to their own. So, for example, in my own case, I've really been exploring the impact of the traumas that have often confronted Jewish people through the millennia. And, in particular, I've been looking at in my own recent generational past, my own ancestry, the impact of what it was like to live under a very oppressive regime of Tsarist Russia, where Jewish people were, had to deal with the pogroms or the sort of the violent attacks that took place on Jewish communities, as well as in the next generation, the Holocaust, and the impact that that left, and how it comes out in forms, in artistic forms, in music and in imagery. You mentioned that I practice guided imagery in music, so I've been interested in how it comes out that way. I just contributed an article to the Nordic Journal of Music Therapy on the role of analytical music therapy in working with transgenerational trauma. And I looked at my own experiences as a client and really went deeply into them and explored how the symbology in the music and the experience in the music and the relationship in the therapy was really important in my work and my capacity to be in that experience and to be able to have the support to work through it and find a way to live without carrying that trauma that was inherited, from previous generations. And by the way, when I say inherited, there are theories that it's an epigenetic phenomenon, that it's actually a physical thing that people carry in their DNA. But more so than that, for me, it's patterns of being with other people, so that you transmit your anxieties and survival instincts and things that you've had to do in your own lifetime. You transmit those to the ways that you are with your children, and then they transmit those. So that trauma becomes a lived experience for people that weren't there for the original event. So I've been exploring the ways in which, in music therapy and music psychotherapy specifically, we can really access that and activate the symbols that are stored for us, that embody those, and then find a way with the support of your therapist to work through it.
That sounds like very fascinating work, and it sounds like you've done a lot of soul searching, and I can only imagine that it just makes you a stronger person and a stronger clinician and professor as well going forward.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I'm looking at my own experiences, but there are so many experiences of historical and cultural trauma, and I'm really interested in understanding how this is manifesting for others as well. And so my plan at this point is to really start reaching out and trying to collaborate with others and seeing what we can discover.
Very nice. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that in the future. In talking about your past, who inspired you to become a musician and then on to becoming a music therapist?
Well, that's a great question and not an easy one to answer. I grew up in a very musical home. There was always music playing. My parents had a wonderful collection of vinyl and this beautiful Fisher stereo system in the late 60s, early 70s. And we had a collection of all the classic, all the classic rock and classical music and the giants of jazz, at the time. I distinctly remember, the Dave Brubeck and John Coltrane and just, those amazing artists, the sounds and the album covers, and just being fascinated with the whole experience of listening. So that definitely was part of my experience. Was just, it was in the house. And my mom was not really a performing musician. I don't know if it was just something she didn't feel she felt confident about. Maybe she was never given the message that she could do it. But she never, she was more of the listener, in my life, and really helped me to listen and appreciate and imagine to music. As did my dad. And my dad did play. He played guitar, mostly liked to play, blues and folk, and sang and spent a lot of time in the house doing that. And we would on occasion play and sing together. Eventually, as a young child, I picked up a guitar and I started playing and was always singing and always involved in music. And we had a piano in the house as well. So I sort of self-taught on the keys. And so, it was always a part of my life. And so I was inspired by many different sources, I'd say. And, in school, I had some amazing, wonderful teachers, music teachers, choir directors and ensemble directors and people that really encouraged us to not just to perform at a high level, but to enjoy and experience the music, to really engage the art and to engage in a way that was meaningful. I remember one choir director had us do this is different than transgenerational, this is intergenerational choir experience with older adults, and we were, in the early grades of school, so this was like second, third, fourth grade, and we would work together, singing with folks from the older adult community and sing together, and it was nurturing, and it was a wonderful resource for both of us, for both communities. So we both benefited a lot from that, and eventually it was featured in the news, and I think eventually, not in our group, but eventually this program called Close Harmony, which that was eventually named, I think went on to win a Grammy, I think, if I'm recalling correctly. So the work became, the impact of the work became really important, and it was that kind of experience of appreciating the human value and the value of bringing joy and dignity and relationship to the experience of music that really made it important for me.
Thank you for sharing that. That sounds like it created some really beautiful and creative memories in your childhood.
Absolutely.
Some of my earliest memories are playing and singing with my family as well, and it's just really creates such a magical bond being able to make music with your own family.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It sounds like you sort of had a very creative life growing up. In your own words, what does it mean to live a creative life?
I think it means to embrace possibility in any moment. To be able to see and hear and feel in ways that are open to where those experiences can lead, what they could be, what they could mean. I think it's that openness in the moment that is, to me, what it means to live creatively. Living creatively also means to build, to construct, to make something out of the elements that you have at your disposal, from the resources that you're afforded. It sometimes means to create things that have never existed before. That's where the imaginative component comes in. I can imagine something that is just not quite like anything that has existed before, and yet in doing so, it brings something valuable into existence and into experience. That's what artists do all the time. And so, but living a creative life doesn't mean you need to formally be an artist vocationally. It could be in your everyday experience, just the way you hear and see and feel and relate to other people. When you're open to those moments of possibility and of making something new out of the opportunity, I think that to me is what embodies creativity.
That's a great outlook. I definitely agree. You can be creative without, like you said, without being formally an artist. You can be creative in the way you organize your home, and you can be creative in the way you cook your meals and the way things of that nature. And I often think that creativity is sometimes born out of needing to be resourceful when there's an obstacle in your way. Let's find a creative way to problem solve.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm thinking about the shared experience of COVID, that many of us are experiencing. Some, I'm sure in very diverse ways, right? We're in very different situations within the context of COVID, but it does present a kind of obstacle, like you're saying, in some form or another, and it may push us, like you're saying, give us an impetus to take the same old thing and look at it in a new way, or see a new potential in it that we didn't see before, because we're being encouraged to do so, pushed to do so, or we have to do so, right? So making something new out of our, like you said, meals, new meals, using limited resources in creative ways that help us to make meaning and out of our days and create value and continue to make a living, right? There's just people struggling to get by, to remain healthy, to remain safe, and creativity is not just something that's you do for fun or aesthetic enjoyment. It's often what you need to do to get through that, and so people are exercising their survival creativity, which I've really appreciated witnessing and hearing during this period we're in now.
Oh, definitely. People have really embraced self-care, like you said, to be able to survive such a unique situation we've all been put in lately. Do you find that the current situation has affected the way that you teach in your creative process? Like, are you looking at it from a completely different lens than before?
Yeah, both literally and figuratively, because so much is through, remote technology like Zoom and so forth, that it's literally a different lens. And we're looking at each other on this, often on screens, on this flat a computer screen, seeing ourselves constantly in these boxes with others. And kind of we're existing not just in our physical spaces, but in these virtual spaces together. That in and of itself is already a different lens. Like that's the experiential lens in which we're encountering one another. So in terms of teaching and learning, that's part of what defines the experience, absolutely. And yes, that has shifted my way of looking at the value, of what education is about. And it has pushed me, as you kind of alluded to before, it's been an impetus for me to be even more mindful and in a sense more resourceful about what can come from the teaching and learning relationship, because there's limits. We can't be in the same room together. So what can we do together in this virtual space that's going to be of value, that's going to give you resources that you need in life that can grow your potential, as not just a professional, but as a person and as an artist. How do we make those connections when sometimes things feel very distant and isolated? That's a constant question that drives, to me, the creativity and imagination. And I credit a lot of that to the students in our community. They've been remarkably creative and imaginative and resourceful and thoughtful in how they've engaged this really unusual modality of teaching and learning. And I really have to just express how much I appreciate what they've accomplished and how they've grown in spite of the limitations. And they've helped me to see how I could support them and be there for them and listen better and listen with nuance that maybe I wasn't exercising previously. Listen with a different kind of sensitivity and certainly with a humility. I think that's grown for me too, and that benefits this relationship.
Mm-hmm. I can only imagine how, I guess, powerful it would be to take some of those graduate or even undergraduate music therapy courses from a digital distance, because there's so much of it I remember from my own experience where simply being physically present with other people and sharing experiences was part of the learning experience. And one of my favorite and most powerful memories in grad school at Montclair was when I took one of your courses where we were in groups and you select a piece of music and you live with that piece of music for the entire semester, and you're jamming on that piece of music and improvising and singing, and you're working as a group. And part of that is physically feeding off each other's cues while you're making music and improvise and being in the moment. So I can only imagine attempting to doing experiences like that and classes like that from a virtual standpoint, how you have to get creative, how different it is, and noticing the, I guess you could say, almost dichotomy of trying to be together and also being apart at the same time. And I can only imagine how that must be if that's a course that you've had to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, let me back up first and just say how I appreciated your contributions to that semester's course and your imagination and creativity. That course that you're describing, the music therapy group experience, which I come to call this process where you take one song and you kind of rotate it through listening, recreation, improvisation, and composition, song odyssey, and it in kind of living with this one song in relationship as you move through this whole journey, including where you get sort of stuck in it, where you hit a creative impasse, where you kind of get sick of it maybe, like why did I choose this song? I can't go any further with this. We've done this one to death, and pushing past those apparent limits of creativity and realizing, oh, wait, there's more. And in that discovery, realizing, this is the true power of music and art and creativity, and really where we can be so helpful to our clients, where they get stuck in the impasses of life and can't see that there's a way through, or don't have the resources, or they aren't afforded the resources to get through. That's where the analogy of working through that piece to get to a deeper place of appreciation and of engagement and of creating something new from it really is this direct analogy to what I think music therapy is about. And I will say I did teach that this fall. It was the undergraduate version because we do both the grad and undergrad version. And just to reiterate what you said, basically students are divided into groups and they choose a song at the beginning, and that's the song they remain with for the semester in all of its iteration. And of course, there's always sort of a dynamic in the group. There's those who are usually exerting a little more influence and dominance, and those who are more of the followers and who may start to shift that role, as time goes on. And I encourage the exploration of the dynamics, the group dynamics, because that's integral to the course as well. And I will say that in this semester, because of the isolation, because of the challenges to one's mental health and in emotional life, and all of the things that this COVID era has really elicited for a lot of people. Because of that, I think it really laid the groundwork for such a beautiful and powerful, intimate process for each of these groups in their own way. And it became far less of an academic exercise and much more of one of mutual empowerment, and that they helped give to each other what they needed. And while some could argue, well, why are you doing that in a class? That sounds like therapy. Don't, you're mixing things, don't do that. I really thought about it carefully, and my feeling is in this context, learning and doing something that is giving you a resource for life and something you need right now. Those two things aren't so clearly separate. And there was clearly learning. There was so much learning. What students had to do with the program Soundtrap, for those, the application Soundtrap, which is sort of, for those that don't know, digital audio workstation that's embodied online, kind of like Google Doc is a shared, contributory document. Same idea. You got a digital audio workspace where people contribute mutually in real time online. And what they were able to do in that space together was just miraculous. And what they had to learn and the skills they had to gain, both aesthetic and technical and interpersonal, and all the things it took, were brilliant. So I really have to give a shout out to that group this year. I appreciate every group and every year. But what they were able to do under these circumstances was really, really moving to me. So I just wanted to mention that.
I can only imagine how beautiful that must have been, and how fulfilling for the students as they're learning with those experiences.
Absolutely, yeah.
You were talking a little bit about how, because we are in the COVID situation, students are going, and therapists as well, are going through a lot of different things from a mental standpoint, including compassion fatigue. Do you have any tips for music therapy professionals or even music therapy students who might be experiencing that right now?
Well, yeah, I think you touched on something important when you mentioned self-care. Self-care could be one of those things, those tropes that people just throw out there. Be sure to practice self-care. Clearly, it's a good idea, and I don't think anyone would argue with it. But it's sometimes hard to make sense of what that actually means, for someone. When someone tells me to practice self-care, I have to think about, well, what does that mean? What am I doing for myself? Am I just doing stuff that feels good, eating good food, getting enough sleep, staying hydrated, like that sort of thing? Is it getting therapy so that I have another person, in some sort of supportive relationship where I can feel cared for by another? There's a lot of dimensions to that. So I do think though that's at the heart of compassion fatigue. I think what happens is when we get stuck in the idea that we're supposed to give and be altruistic and be there, quote unquote, for our clients, but we leave ourselves out of the equation, it becomes fatiguing. It drains us in a certain way. And I think this could be our culture. And when I say our culture, I mean, the dominant culture of the United States, kind of European influenced culture. I think that we dichotomize, we kind of split up this idea of for yourself or for another. And we don't see how the two are bound together in stakeholdership. I wrote something out the other day. I'm just pretty basic. I'll just say it. Caring for self is caring for others because it means being more fully present and available. Caring for others is caring for self because it means the community and world in which one lives is that much better. So, it's never really selfish to be caring for oneself, as we're sometimes taught, I think, in a kind of distorted way. It's actually being there for others. And it's also, my investment, for example, as a therapist in my clients is because, yes, I care for them, but I'm also invested in the same world that they live in. And if they are engaging their world more fully with their human potential, this world's better for me too. So I have that sort of direct stakeholdership investment in the work. And yes, I need to get paid for what I do because being paid affords me the resources to keep doing what I do. It's not that I get paid because I quote unquote deserve to get paid for the labor I put in. It's more that being paid is what we need to do in our economic society to have that resource to continue contributing and serving the public the way we want to. So I look at it that way. We need to be afforded those resources and we need it to be enough. Like we can't, in our field, unfortunately, I think a lot of us are not paid what we, in accordance with the services we provide and the resources we need to do it. I think that there's a lot to say about that, why fields in the arts are often diminished that way, and maybe why our field has not been assertive about its own value as a stakeholder in the community. There's lots to say about that. But I think, compassion fatigue comes in where we fail to feel like stakeholders, and fail to experience that mutuality. So I think that that's something that our field as a whole can really think about and does for sure, but consider ways in which we can engage that way of looking at providing services as professionals.
I really love your sentiment that you talked about how self-care is for others and how it's not selfish. Speaking from my own experience from this year, when I started the school year, because I work in the schools, I definitely felt frazzled and anxious and nervous. And it was only after I started finding ways to have, instead of doom scrolling at when I got home from work, I found ways to express myself, and that is how I ended up deciding to form my podcast and being able to do that creative outlet and give back to the community and learn more about other professions and share that with whomever listens. I found that I was able to be more present in my day job after I started this, and I thought it was just so interesting, the positive changes that happened in me because I took the time to do something creative that I'm very passionate about.
I love that. Yeah, I love that you're giving voice to that resource within yourself and in those that you invite into this space with you, like today with me. It's really wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
and I appreciate it a great deal. And I resonate with you about feeling that anxiety when this situation first hit us last year. I definitely experienced that anxiety, and it brought up a whole bunch of feelings of self-doubt. Being an educator in higher ed is a position that I regard as a position of great privilege and also great responsibility. You're really there, you are there to serve as a resource for people who are moving into some very important stages of their adult lives and taking their own identities and creativity into the world. So I became very vulnerable at the outset of COVID, but I leaned into it because I've really discovered at this stage of my life, I've learned that that's often the way that better things happen in the long run is being honest and open with that vulnerability. And I tried to do that, with students. And so we had that experience of being in something together. I don't agree with that phrase, we're all in it together, in the sense that everybody's having an equal struggle, right? We know that's nonsense because some people have way more privilege than others. And, so it's not that. But what it was a feeling of mutuality and connection. And, I could be vulnerable and so could you. And we're going to experience being there for each other in this really critical moment in history. So I appreciated what all of my music therapy training provided me in coming to this moment, and really appreciating the learner community at Montclair State that welcomed that and really ran with it and allowed this to be part of a really valuable learning experience for our whole community. Again, as stakeholders, I had to allow myself again to embrace that stakeholdership. There's that connection between I and thou, that we are mutually invested in something together, even though we may be individually under very different circumstances. We're invested in something together. And the pandemic becomes a context where we find this a particular context for a bond, for bonding in that. So I certainly I resonate with what you're saying about having to discover that way of self-care, and finding what works for you and what then ultimately works for the community.
And we as therapists, we certainly go through many journeys as we learn and grow, not just with what we do in therapy and learning from our clients and learning from students and learning from being students, and especially now during this historic time. But if you could travel back in time, is there anything that you wish you had known when you first started on your journey of music therapy?
That's always a fun exercise, a fun imagination exercise, going back in time. I don't know if it's a question of what to know or not, but I probably would have taken even more time to engage creatively with other people. Spend less time ruminating in, some of my own issues as a person, and trying to work harder to make connections with others in creativity, and to make more music and discover music and listen to more artists. There's so many artists I'm still discovering now, and I know that's lifelong, but I do feel like I could have engaged so much more, and that would have enriched my experience so much more. I wouldn't call it a regret, but I think, looking back, I could certainly, if I were to advise myself, I'd say get more, play more, listen more, engage even more deeply, appreciate more, take time, with what you're experiencing, and especially take time with others in doing that. So I think it's that's one of the when you ask that question, that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind, at least now for me.
And I can certainly understand that. I mean, there's so much wonderful art out there, music and museums and books and movies that it's almost endless, We need so much more time to be able to experience it all.
Yeah, and we all grow, in different ways. I look back at the person I was, and I think, particularly in terms of social justice and reflexivity about human identity issues and privilege and power and things like that. I also would wish that I had been more engaged in that realm too at an earlier age than when I really engaged it. I feel like as fully as I am now, and again, lifelong lifelong growth in this area for sure. I just would have liked to move it along a little more quickly. So that's another thing that I've come to value more than ever, in politically speaking, more politically engaged in that sense. Is another thing that I'd advise my younger self to do.
That sounds like really wonderful advice, just all around. So we're gonna switch gears and shake it up in the last couple minutes with a few fun questions. One thing that I sometimes ask my guests is if you could have dinner with any creative person or few creative people, dead or alive, who would it be?
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
It's a
Yeah.
hard one.
I mean, wow. There's just, of course, there's figures like Da Vinci that come to mind, and I think I mentioned John Coltrane before, and in my undergraduate education, I took a course in black music and found myself deeply appreciating the music of the early blues music and in the American music canon. So I was really appreciating Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey, and I just would love, because you just get those little scratchy recordings of them, and so you don't really get a sense of what that experience was, conveying this lived experience through the form that we use so much in music therapy. We use the blues left and right, and yet there's this cultural. It's so rich and full. I would just love to spend time just singing and playing would be great. But even just talking, even just asking, what is your life like? How do the blues play a role in this? What does the blues mean to you? How did you create this form? I mean, these were women who inherited culturally a lot of this work, but also took it into a whole new context. Talk about creativity, so that to me would be pretty mind blowing to have a dinner with anyone from that particular era and that community. Man, it would be something.
And the entertainment after dinner would be fantastic.
Yeah, and like I said, what an honor if I could even just sit back and just play a couple of, one or two chords on some instrument, just feel a part of it. Oh, that would be an incredible experience.
So, one more fun question before we wrap up. And I don't know if this is going to be a difficult one to answer or not, but if you had intro music or a theme song to your life, what song would that be?
It would be so difficult to answer that one because there's so many. I don't know, I don't know if I could comfortably identify a theme song for my life. I think it would be more like it would have to be something symphonic or something choral. I think that wouldn't be so much a song, but like a story. A musical narrative of some kind. I don't know. I really don't know what that would be. The way that I relate to music is through the aesthetic experience, and there's so many beautiful works. There's so much beauty out there that I don't think I could identify one. Sorry if that's a cop out, but I just can't. I don't think I could do it.
And that's okay. I completely understand. There really is so much beautiful music. It would be difficult to pick, and it might even shift depending on the day of the week it is.
Yeah, true.
Before we go, if you could step into my shoes as the podcast host, is there anything you would have asked yourself that I didn't ask you?
Well, no, you did a great job. Actually, these were wonderful questions, challenging
Well, thank
questions.
you.
I think I heard the way you defined music therapy at the outset, and I think it may have been interesting to be asked how I define music therapy. Although in the course of our conversation, you probably picked it up anyway. That may have been an interesting question. That's the only one that I'm thinking of that could have been interesting.
Very interesting indeed. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on Creative Piecemeal Podcast. And listeners, you can find Professor Abrams' full bio in the show notes. And there will also be a link to the wonderful music therapy program at Montclair State University if you're interested in learning more about our field. Thanks. And don't forget to like and subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast source and also on Instagram and Facebook. Take care. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.